Hi. Today I want to talk a little bit about trauma. I know that I post a lot of content regarding trauma and social bonding and all these things, but I realized I don't really have a lot of in-depth content about this, and I think it's good to just kind of put it out there, talk a little bit about it, and explain what trauma actually is. Don't mind this device. I'm just doing a heart monitoring for 24 hours, so yeah. Let's get started. Let's get into it. So, first of all, when we talk about trauma, I think it's really, really, really important to remember that trauma isn't just these severe events that can trigger PTSD, for example. Trauma exists on a spectrum. So, we have these super, I'm going to die type of traumas that can be extremely difficult to overcome. We can also have more kind of low-key trauma, depending on what age that we are in when we experience certain low-key traumas, that can also have a really, really, really big impact on us, but in a less kind of obvious way. And so this also depends on the individual. So we're all different, right? It depends on the resilience of the individual, how their nervous system is kind of made up, how their all the genetic makeup, and also early experiences. So when we look at dogs, we need to both think of, the species in its own. What are species appropriate behaviors? How does the species function? Then we also have so many different breeds that we want to make sure that we look at when we understand these aspects. So we have so many different breeds that are bred for completely different purposes. Some breeds are much more sensitive to, the social conflict, and some breeds are not sensitive to social conflict at all, or not to that extent. Most of our dogs are sensitive to social conflict because they are social animals, but some dogs are more independent. They're not as dependent on humans in order to feel safe and survive, and some dogs are really, really, really important or dependent on humans. Not only that, but we also have obviously individuals within these breed groups. So just because we have let's say a cattle dog, we can't just make statements that because we're a cattle dog, this and this and this and this applies. Yeah, they might be more likely to have herding behavior. They're very likely to have herding behavior, but not everything that they do is going to be connected to herding behavior. And sometimes just because we have something that might be kind of lit up a little bit more and kind of illuminated by a herding behavior doesn't mean that it's necessarily only that either. So it's a very complex thing, right? Because we have so many different layers of components that is affecting how these individual organisms kind of experiences reality. And also we need to remember that we don't know exactly how they experience reality. We don't completely understand their cognition. We can't ask them how they experience things. We can't really ask them anything because they can't speak to us, right? So we have to make a lot of assumptions and rely on already determined data and facts. So, but what we do understand is how trauma works, right? So this is not so much assuming things. We have to assume how it's experienced, but it's not assumptions how it works. This is data. So with trauma, what happens is there's this kind of little fragmentation when trauma is happening, and this fragmentation once again exists on a spectrum. So we have some individuals, and this is depending on so many different factors, that have really severe fragmentation where we can see dissociative disorders, and I'm talking about humans right now, by the way, where we can see dissociative disorders, personality disorders, addiction and stuff like that kind of comes up later in life, where those fragmentations have been so severe that there's this internal conflict caused by this trauma. Then we have other fragmentations that aren't as severe, where we might just struggle with self-confidence or feelings of not being worthy, stuff like that tends to, we get shaped into those kind of thought patterns early on in life, depending on our resilience, our genetic composition, and makeup, and also experiences in early childhood, especially the experiences that we have with our primary caregivers. So if we have an experience of being abandoned, let's say on a regular basis, then we might get that kind of fragmentation related to fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, which might causes difficulties with being intimate or getting into trusting relationships when we get older. What also might really affect these things, especially for dogs, their entire lives, because we need to remember that dogs don't mature in the same way as humans do. So in humans, we might have a lot of traumatic events that shape us when we're children, and then we grow up and they kind of turn to something a little bit different. For dogs, it's going to look different. So if we look at, let's say, attachment issues in children, how they present themselves when they're adults, we can't really make that direct connection with dogs, because dogs will not have the same maturity when they grow up. They will kind of stay young forever, right? So if we look at attachment, just start looking at attachment for a little bit. So a secure attachment means that the child knows that when I cry, my parent will come and comfort me. When I need something, when I have a need that I need to have met, my parent will, satisfy that need. When they leave, they will come back. When I'm sad, they will, comfort me. There's consistency in this, and even if it happens, sometimes there's a reprimand, or we all get pissed sometimes, or there's something we might not be able to tend to the child's need immediately. Even if that happens, the general consistency tends to create a very secure attachment and a resilience in the child. So when they grow up, they don't really have any major difficulties connecting with other people. They can ask for help. They feel worthy. They have a sense of self, right? Because there's not too much fragmentation going on there. So they are more kind of integrated as an individual. They're more, I don't want to use the word whole, because the fragmentation, it doesn't mean that you're not whole. It just means that you have more conflict within you. So that's what a secure attachment might look like. If we look at insecure attachments, and there's lots of different attachment styles, I'm not going to go into that because I am not here to tell you about human trauma. I'm just explaining this so we can move on to how it manifests in dogs. So with that insecure attachment, there's an inconsistency, right? So sometimes when I cry out, someone comes. Sometimes when I cry out, I get yelled at. Or sometimes when I do this, I get praised. And sometimes when I do this, I get yelled at. Or sometimes when I ask for help, I get ignored. Sometimes when I ask for help, I get my needs met. That inconsistency, that creates a huge fragmentation in just this kind of, I don't know what to do to get my needs met. I don't know what to do to survive, because I feel like it's confusing. As a child, that's very confusing, right? Because you don't know, how do I have no control over getting my needs met. And when I try these things, I get different results. That's very confusing for a child. And or sometimes we can have, there's no needs met. There's nothing met, or it's always met with, rejection or anger or something like that. Then we can get a completely different type of response too, where it's a lot of protectiveness. For dogs, what we tend to see is a lot of ignoring, crying out, because that's attention seeking. We need to remember that attention seeking is not bad. Attention seeking is an attempt to get contact, to get connection, to get comfort, to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. It's not something bad. For some reason, we have created this narrative where attention-seeking behaviors are bad, and we need to discontinue them and correct them as soon as possible. So a dog that barks when they're left alone, we cannot have that. But what we need to remember here is that barking is not the dog, being demanding or attention-seeking. They're crying out because they feel scared. There's an emotional response because the dog doesn't understand, especially if they're a puppy. They don't understand that, you just left to go into a different room. They're panicking. They're panicking because their primary caregiver left. And when we look at the relationship between a dog and their dog guardian, it is extremely similar to one between a child and a parent. Now, it's not the exact same, and we can't really make a direct connection here either. But what we can do, if we understand ethology, if we understand species appropriate behavior, if we understand dogs as a species, and then also different breeds, and how that kind of, if we understand the psychology and how they learn and all of those things, and then we understand how these things affect social animals, we can make connections, right? So for a dog, we need to remember that they are not doing things out of spite. They're not doing things because they're demanding. They're doing things because they depend on us. We're their caregivers, and we will always be in this dynamic, because dogs never grow up and move out of their house. They never become an adult human being. It's almost like living with a toddler for your entire life, except they're not a human. They're a dog, so they have very specific needs connected to their species. So this can be a little confusing sometimes, because a dog that is in distress might need a completely different co-regulation method than a child that's in distress. So humans, primates, we want to grab, we want to touch, we want to hug, we want to embrace. Dogs don't really like that. So when we want to comfort a dog, we might want to take a completely different approach. We might want to utilize body language and kind of conflict decreasing signals, such as calming signals, licking your lips, avoiding eye contact, turning our bodies away, letting them approach us and gently touch them in a way that they like. And if they communicate in any way that they're uncomfortable, make sure that we show that, okay, I'm not going to touch you anymore. Let them lay next to us without us hovering over or embracing them. Let them have the ability to share space with us. Let them share food with us. Play is extremely important. Being able to play in a way that's bonding. So tugging and having a regulating face. So utilizing, facial expressions. Dogs are so good at understanding and reading humans' facial expressions, because they have evolved to live alongside of humans. So they are experts at reading us, but we're not always experts at reading them. So a lot of this depends on how well we understand dog body language. So understanding dog body language and species appropriate behaviors is key to be able to create a secure attachment with a dog. And so how trauma can affect dogs. So if we have an inconsistency in this relationship, in this social bonding, or if we have very severe traumatic experiences, so a really bad physical correction, or abusive events, or abandonment, like actual abandonment, a dog that was just left at the road or something like that, those really, really horrific experiences the dogs can go through. What we tend to see is a lot of fear, lack of trust. And usually how this is displayed is also in a very subtle way. So dogs don't always make sense to humans. So a dog that might be fearful or avoidant, we might not really pick up on that until they start to become defensive. And then we call them aggressive or dominant, whatever words we want to use for that. But what we want to remember that a lot of the time, that is a result of conflict not being resolved, because we have failed to pick up on the conflict even existing in the beginning, or to begin with. A lot of the time we can get sometimes this is referred to as controlling and manipulative behaviors, which is, yes, it is, but it has a very negative connotation. It tends to be then kind of moved on to us. Your dog is trying to control and manipulate you. They're being dominant. That's not the case. So when we see a lot of controlling, manipulative behaviors, it is a indicator that the animal is not feeling safe, and they're trying to manipulate and control the environment and other organisms' behavior in order to feel safe and survive. So this is not an indicator that your dog is trying to run your life or be the boss of the house or be dominant. It's a very strong indicator that they're not feeling safe. And so what we can see with manipulating and controlling behavior is a lot of, deterring behaviors or appeasing behaviors. And this means that the dog is maybe, goofing around a little bit and kind of fooling around in a way that seems a little frantic or manic, or they can be very deterring. So they might, either try to make you go away by rolling over and like, hey, just freaking leave me alone, showing teeth, trying to make you to back off. All of these things are ways that dogs communicate that, hey, I do not like you doing what you're doing, or I'm feeling conflicted about the situation we're in or the environment we're in. And this is also where it's really important to understand dog behavior when we're looking at these things. It can be confusing to understand why your dog is doing a certain thing if we're not understanding the entire individual. So not only your specific dog's history, or breed, but understanding the breed, the species, the history, the early socialization, the relationship that you're having, learning history, the environment you're living in, your dog's specific personality and characteristics. There's so many components that we need to understand, and then also understand what in your dog's life might have been kind of creating these traumatic responses. So, and as I was talking about in the beginning when I was talking about humans, trauma isn't always big and severe, and it's not always manifested as these big, PTSD type of responses. Sometimes it is more subtle, and it's more of a kind of a core type of fragmentation. So we're not feeling safe, we're scared of rejection, we're fearful of abandonment, we feel like we're not worthy of love. These types of personality traits, because it almost becomes part of us, right? With dogs, what we need to remember is that they're not humans, so we cannot apply too many complex narratives, too many complex emotions to them. We have the 7 blue ribbon emotions that we know that they exist in dogs. We can assume that there is a level of more advanced emotions, but we don't know, and we can't ask them, so we can't really apply too many complex processes. We need to take a step back and look at it for what it is. Even though we might believe that there's more complexity going on, it can be tricky when we try to apply human characteristics onto our dogs. If we understand dogs really well, and if we understand trauma really well and all these components, it can be easier to kind of apply a little bit of a narrative sometimes in order to get some compassion. Compassion is really important when we work with dogs. Compassion and empathy for their experience of living in a human world. It's important. If we don't fully understand dogs, this can be kind of dangerous, because we can put a lot of expectations on dogs that we can't really put on them. We can put some responsibility on our dogs that we aren't supposed to put on them. We need to also remind ourselves that the human society and the human world does not make sense to our dogs. I understand what a car is. I understand what a fan is. I understand what a broom is. I understand what a playground is. I understand what a neighborhood is. I understand why my dog has to wear a leash. My dog will not understand these things. And it doesn't matter what I do. I might be able to desensitize her to these things and habituate her to these things, but she will not understand them. And this is something that we tend to completely forget. We just want our dogs to, deal with shit. But we can't always ask them to deal with things because they're not natural for them. So, I know this was a little bit all over the place, but I wanted to just kind of go a little bit in depth with it. I hope it was helpful. If you have any questions, if there's anything you're wondering, please let me know. If you want to add something, or if there's any comments that you're having on what I'm talking about, please let me know. I am not qualified to work with humans. I am not qualified to help humans. Just wanted to put that out there. I am a dog behavior consultant. So what I'm talking about, if you're having difficulties yourself, if you're struggling yourself with trauma, I highly recommend seeking help from a human therapist. I work with dogs. Okay, so just wanted to put that out there. No disclaimer. Let me know if you have any questions. All right, bye.